Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation will come to order. Ask unanimous consent for the chairman to be authorized to declare recess any time during today's hearing. Without objection, show that order. I ask for unanimous consent that the members not on the committee be permitted on the subcommittee to ask questions. Without objection, show that order. As a reminder of the members, insert a document into the record. Please also email it to tni@mail.house.gov. Okay, I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes for the purpose of an opening statement. So we meet today to receive testimony from the Coast Guard on fiscal year 2025 budget request. I'd like to welcome our witnesses, Admiral Linda Fagan, who is the Commandant of the Coast Guard, and Master Chief Heath Jones, the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard. First, I'd like to recognize Coast Guard leadership in recovery of the response efforts for the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse in Baltimore. Had a chance to go view that. That was pretty awesome. Remind us of the vital importance of the Coast Guard and in protecting our nation's waterways. We are here today to discuss what the Coast Guard needs to continue providing that service. While I applaud the increase in the President's budget for both operation and support and the procurement, construction, and improvements accounts, I urge funding levels in the line of H.R. 7659, the Coast Guard Authorization Act of 2024, which recently passed the House. That measure authorizes nearly double the current requested amount for new vessels, aircraft, and IT and shoreside infrastructure investments. But even the House-passed authorization levels are not generous. Funding at that level would only stop the growth of the construction and maintenance backlog and fund those acquisition programs already approved by the Department of Homeland Security. Admiral Fagan, during your address to the state of the Coast Guard, you rightly recognized our service funding challenges, admitting that your maintenance budget will only cover half the planned cutter maintenance projects in 2024. I look forward to hearing you share what you're doing to address those challenges. I also look forward to hearing the update about your recapitalization priorities, including plans for the Polar Security Cutter and shoreside infrastructure. This subcommittee has serious concerns about combined budget impact of simultaneous construction of Polar Security Cutters and the construction of the 2 offshore patrol cutters per year for a decade, starting with fiscal year 2026. I expect to hear from you today about the plan to move these programs forward. Given the Coast Guard's current recruitment and retention challenges, I also look forward to hearing what the Coast Guard is doing to ensure that its members who give so much to their country have buildings, facilities, and IT support they need and deserve. Subcommittee greatly appreciates the hard work the Coast Guard does every day. Just last month, a young Coast Guard pilot, Michael McCaslin, the brother of one of our T&I committee staffers, rescued a pregnant woman from a cruise ship hundreds of miles off Puerto Rico. And just a few days ago, Coast Guard rescued 7 people from a vessel after it was disabled by a lightning strike and struck both the captain and the vessel off the shore coast of my state, Florida. This demonstrates why you live up to your motto, and we just really appreciate that. This subcommittee urges you to be straightforward with Congress about the services needed and ask for what need to carry out that mission. Thank you for your participation today. I look forward to your candid testimony. I now recognize Ranking Member Carbajal for an opening statement for 5 minutes. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I do that, I wanted to ask for to be able to allow Ranking Members Larson's statement to be submitted for the record.
Without objection, show that done.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for calling today's hearing on the fiscal year 2025 budget request for the U.S. Coast Guard. Admiral Fagan and Master Chief Jones, while the service is facing trying times, your leadership is instrumental in supporting Coasties. You've done an outstanding job leading the service thus far, and I'm confident that the Coast Guard has a bright future under your leadership. We expect a lot from our Coasties. Recently, they have responded to the vessel collisions and bridge collapse in Baltimore, delivered supplies to ICE in McMurdo Station in the Antarctic, and traversed the Taiwan Straits. I was pleased that the fiscal year 2024 budget request included a slight increase in discretionary funding, but still more resources are needed to support the service. I have had the opportunity to visit numerous Coast Guard stations around the country. While the new cutters and aircraft I have seen are great, the people charged with operating those assets are certainly strained. Coasties in many cases are working in subpar buildings. They are living hours away from their workplace due to insufficient housing allowances. They're not able to take time off because of workforce shortages. They often can't find quality childcare, and so on. I've heard from service members across the country about mental health concerns. Search and rescue, drug and migrant interdiction, and extended deployments can take a serious physical and mental toll. Coasties and their families deserve the highest level of medical care regardless of their geographic location. If we don't take care of the Coasties, we cannot expect the same Coast Guard we've come to rely on. Search and rescue capacity will decline. More illegal drugs will make it across our borders. More environmental disasters will occur as a result of fewer vessel inspections and decreased response capacity. Congress must do better. The Commandant has said that the Coast Guard needs to be a $20 billion service by 2030, and I believe that should be the minimum. Finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the Coast Guard's efforts to address sexual assault and sexual harassment and the culture change in the service. Turning a ship as old and large as the Coast Guard takes strong leadership, time, and commitment. I'm pleased to witness strong leadership and commitment by Admiral Fagan and believe that the service is on the right course. This committee continues to conduct vigorous oversight to ensure that the ship stays on course. As we discuss the Coast Guard's budget and ongoing resources needs, I hope our witnesses will be candid. Congress and the American people need to know what will happen if Coast Guard is not a $20 billion service by 2030. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much. I would again like to welcome our witnesses today and thank them for being here today. We really appreciate that. I'd like to take a moment to explain our lighting system, which is familiar to everybody in the room, I think. Just red, well, we'll start with green. Green means go. Yellow means slow up. And red means stop. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included in the record. Without objection, show that ordered. I ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open for such time as our witnesses have to provide answers to any questions that may be submitted in writing. Without objection, show that ordered. I ask for unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days and that additional comments and information submitted by the members or witnesses to be included into the record of today's hearing. Without objection, show that ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. And with that, Commandant, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Good morning, Chair Webster. Thank you. Ranking Member Carbajal, distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. On behalf of the service, I'd like to thank you for your continued support of the Coast Guard, our workforce, and our families. The work the Coast Guard does every day is critical to the nation's success. We protect ports, waterways, and maritime commerce. We respond to crises like the Baltimore bridge collapse, hurricanes, and oil spills. We're at our best during those challenging leadership responses. We are the world's experts at saving lives at sea. We fight criminals on the high seas, such as narcotic smugglers, human traffickers, and illegal fishermen. We are present in the Arctic, the Indo-Pacific, and throughout the Western Hemisphere. We work to protect U.S. national security every day. We work with the Joint Force, interagency, international allies, and partners to respond to crisis and enable responsible maritime governance and protect the rules-based international order. We're in the news almost every day, and the story is our exceptional service to the nation. How do we do it? The answer is our people. Without their dedication, the ships or aircraft we're investing in don't move. Our people truly are the heart and soul of the Coast Guard. But we must ensure that their needs are being met. We are at risk right now across the service, and we need your support to ensure we can continue to support our workforce to continue operations today and invest in the capabilities necessary for operations tomorrow. Those investments reflect our need to be a $20 billion Coast Guard by 2030, our need for $3+ million in PC&I budget annually. We need to invest in our talent management system, which has not changed in over 60 years, and continue to improve the support to our workforce and their families. We're in a competition for talent, and our success relies on our ability to recruit and retain the best and brightest. We must also provide our workforce the tools they need to be successful. Last year, we celebrated a significant milestone in our acquisition portfolio as we launched the first offshore patrol cutter, Argus. My top acquisition priority is beginning construction on Polar Security Cutter, and the top-line reality of the budget does not align with this priority. Our procurement, construction, and improvements appropriation is at its lowest level in nearly a decade. To properly invest in our readiness today and for the future, the Coast Guard needs at least $3 billion annually in PC&I. We're extremely grateful to the committee for the $3.4 billion in PC&I funding included in the Coast Guard Authorization Act, which just passed the House a few weeks ago. I'm also concerned about our maintenance budget shortfalls. We currently project our ship maintenance budget will only cover half our planned ship maintenance projects. We have similar shortfalls in infrastructure and aircraft accounts. Deferring maintenance increases unplanned maintenance, disrupts work and training schedules, takes cutters and aircraft off operational mission. It reduces readiness and operational effectiveness. Our people bear the burden of these unplanned repairs as they spend time scrambling to keep assets operational and defer their own time off and time with their families. This isn't a notional problem in the future. It's the Coast Guard we're operating today. Our crews put their lives on the line every day to protect our nation and the workforce, the public that we serve. We launch into the teeth of a hurricane. We respond to wildfires. We put ourselves at risk so that others may live, so that others may be saved, and so that we can prosper as a nation. We must invest in 2025 and beyond to generate sustained readiness and resilience while building the Coast Guard of the future. Together, I'm confident that we can meet the challenges facing the service and ensure our workforce has the resources they need to accomplish their missions safely and effectively. I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Now, Master Chief Jones, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Chairman Webster, Ranking Member Carbajal, and distinguished subcommittee members. It's an honor to appear before you as the Master Chief Petty Officer of the Coast Guard. And as I begin, I would like to express my sincere appreciation alongside Admiral Fagan and on behalf of our dedicated Coast Guard Sentinels for your unwavering support of our workforce and their families. Our workforce is the heart and soul of the Coast Guard, and their dedication and sacrifice to keeping our nation safe and secure shows in their commitment to duty. I want to echo the Commandant and clearly state to this committee and our entire workforce that we are committed to revitalizing our talent management systems and to strengthening our service culture. Despite the work that remains, I am immensely proud of our workforce's unwavering drive and dedication to tackle every challenge head on. The Coast Guard is more than a military service. The core of every Sentinel is the call to serve and to help others. We are a closely bonded community, and our Coast Guard families are paramount. Their altruistic sacrifices and constant support are imperative to achieving our missions. Therefore, we must provide for our families by focusing on the acronym of CASH: child care, access to physical and behavioral health care, schools, and housing. As we discuss the future of the Coast Guard, my primary focus will always be our Sentinels, specifically the service's ability to attract and retain talented individuals essential to effectively carry out the critical missions that our nation calls us to do and our nation deserves. Additionally, while we are extremely optimistic about the positive trends in our Coast Guard recruiting efforts, we must continue to invest in the resources our members need to enhance our recruiting technologies and capabilities. We must also continue to focus on base pay to ensure that we can maintain our ability to compete with the private sector for the talent that we need. The fiscal year 2025 pay raise and the work of the Quality of Life panel have made steps in the right direction. While I acknowledge that young people who join our service are not primarily motivated by financial gain, it is essential to recognize that they may be more likely to leave for better opportunities if offered. These highly skilled Americans execute a broad array of missions every day. To meet these demands, we require stable and on-time appropriations to provide the tools and infrastructure to recruit, train, and retain them. As we saw in 2019 when Coast Guard members did not receive paychecks, continuing resolutions pose an immediate and severe threat to our service's readiness. Beyond pay, we need the appropriate facilities to train our people. Training Center Cape May, our single accession point for the entire enlisted workforce, will always remain a top priority for Admiral Fagan and I. As we prepare to break ground on the first new barracks in over 50 years, we express our gratitude for Congress for their recent support and planning the construction of the second barracks. However, we must not lose focus on the ongoing total recapitalization efforts at Cape May. The current facilities hinder our ability to continuously train recruits to service standards. By modernizing these facilities, we can significantly increase our throughput, ensuring that we can meet the growing demands of our mission. Therefore, the service needs a modernized training facility to develop the most resilient and fleet-ready sentinels. To this end, the Coast Guard has included requests for a multi-purpose training facility and barracks recapitalization in Cape May as part of our unfunded priorities list for 2025. I would like to reiterate the critical role of the Coast Guard in protecting our nation's maritime interests and ensuring the safety and security of our citizens. The Coast Guard will continue to face significant challenges in maintaining service readiness and modernizing capabilities to meet the evolving threats and demands of the 21st century. But we remain true to our motto and will be Semper Paratus. But we cannot do that without your continued support. Your Coast Guard remains steadfast in its dedication to attracting and fostering a skilled and inclusive workforce, and I am grateful for the unwavering commitment of this committee to support the mission to defend and safeguard America's vital maritime domain. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you both for your testimony. Really appreciate that. Turn to questions. I'll recognize myself, but I first want to say both of you are a credit to the Coast Guard, and you've presented yourself well today. I look forward to your answers to the questions. Admiral Fagan, on April 29th, during an interview with the Center for Strategic International Studies, you twice stated that the Polar Security Cutter was on budget. This committee is well aware that the Coast Guard does not have an agreed-upon price, but or a timeline for the program. So, what are your comments about that?
Thank you, Chairman. I share your concerns with regard to the current progress and state of the Polar Security Cutter. When I said we were on budget, I was reflecting the previous appropriations in prior years that have been budgeted, over $1.8 billion, with approximately $820 million remaining in previous appropriations for Polar Security Cutter. And I acknowledge that the Polar Security Cutter, there is no ask in the 25 budget. It reflects some of the top line pressure and priorities. We are working daily with the shipyard who has the contract, Bollinger, Mississippi, to bring clarity to both the design maturity and timeline and cost. I don't have that definitized yet, committed to sharing it with the committee as we gain greater fidelity with regard to what rebaselining and the schedule will look like with regard to Polar Security Cutter. You know, Polar Security Cutter, we're building that under an integrated program office with the Navy, so we're working with the Navy as well as we work to understand what cost and time is associated with that. This is a critical national asset. It's a national security asset. It's critical to our sovereignty in the Arctic and elsewhere. We remain committed to fielding that Polar Security Cutter. I have a sense of urgency. I share the frustration with regard to timeline, but we remain committed to creating that clarity and articulation with regard to cost, schedule, and design maturity, and committed to sharing that with the committee as it comes into clarity.
How does the Navy play into all that?
It's an integrated program office that is overseeing the building and the execution of the contract, and so we work with the Navy on the contracting and acquisition, a piece of procuring the Polar Security Cutter, and I'm happy to have the staff come over and give your staff just more details on how that is working. It's a great relationship with the Navy, and we continue to remain committed, both services through that integrated program office.
Will they have any ownership in the boat, in the security cutter, or is it just advice they're giving us?
No, sir, the cutter will be a commissioned Coast Guard cutter, and the Coast Guard will operate it on behalf of the nation as a national security asset.
Is there an agreement of a cost estimate and a timeline being, is anybody withholding it from this committee, or it's just, it hasn't been produced yet?
Sir, that we are not withholding the cost and timeline schedule. We will provide that as soon as there is clarity. We're working diligently with Bollinger, Mississippi to provide that clarity and certainty. As soon as we have it, I'm committed to sharing it with the committee.
So on the screen, I think, is going to be a appropriated authorized level of Coast Guard. So the level that was agreed to is the top one, but the money we got is not that. So we're short. I mean, is Homeland Security taking part of our money?
Sir, I, as every agency and organization in the government, is subjected to a top-line budget submission, and we continue to work to submit budgets that reflect priorities for the nation. I acknowledge, in what the chart reflects, we're at the lowest PC&I level of funding for the organization, the lowest that we've seen in 10 years. We continue to work to make priority decisions as we submit those budgets, and as I've acknowledged, and we're talking about the Polar Security Cutter, the out-year cost for fielding additional Polar Security Cutters, that is not a number that is going to fit in the current top line as the budget is constructed for the Coast Guard.
Okay, my time is up, so I'll yield back, and thank you right now. Appreciate that. Ranking Member Carbajal, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're the chairman. Your time's never up if you don't want it to be up. But I appreciate you handing it over to me, Mr. Chairman. Master Chief Jones, I've had the opportunity to meet and talk with Coasties stationed across the country and across the world. I found that the best way to understand their problems is to ask what their spouses would change about their experience with the Coast Guard. What are you hearing from service members and their families, and what is the Coast Guard doing to address those concerns?
Thank you for the question, sir, and I would say that you are absolutely spot on, as that's where we often get the most realistic feedback on things, or how it's affecting the families. And in my opening statement, when I referred to the acronym of CASH, that is where we got that from. That came from our ombudsman at large, who visits with the families as we're visiting with units. And those four things, the child care, the access to physical and behavioral health care, schools and housing, are the top four things everywhere we have Sentinel stationed around the world. Where they are geographically, that order may change in there, but those are the top four things at all times. Some areas where we've seen where have made a marked difference have been on the ability to get child care subsidies so that our folks can pay for child care in areas where we don't have child development centers. We made investments in the child development centers in areas of mass where we have large groups. The change that is forthcoming this summer to be able to have the child care subsidies sent directly to the families, so that the families can then determine the best child care for their situation, or making a marked improvement in those areas, sir.
Thank you. Admiral Fagan, with the passage of the Safer Seas Act, the Coast Guard is tasked with implementing several new authorities and requirements for industry. How important is the requirement to report harassment to the Coast Guard, and how does the Coast Guard plan to use that information?
We're actively implementing the Safer Seas Act now. We're 100% committed to eradicating sexual assault, sexual harassment, not just at sea on commercial vessels, but in our own organization as well. Every employee, whoever their employer is, has the right to a workplace that's free from sexual assault and sexual harassment. We've stood up the call lines. We are accepting calls from mariners who experience harmful behaviors at sea and are actively investigating those cases. What is good for the commercial industry and our mariners applies as well to our workforce, and we are committed to that work and look forward to continuing to work with the committee as we engage to eliminate those behaviors at sea and in our own workforce.
Thank you. Admiral Fagan, in light of Operation Fouled Anchor, the Coast Guard underwent an, quote, accountability and transparency review, end quote, which resulted in directed actions for you and your leadership team. All the while, the Coast Guard is facing a 10% workforce shortfall. Any amount of distrust in leadership will hinder recruitment and potentially harm readiness. Do you have the resources you need to fully accomplish these actions, and will additional resources be needed?
Thank you. We completed the accountability and transparency review. It was a 90-day sprint to help focus the work ahead for the organization. I'm happy to report that we are well underway in completing the directed actions in the directed action report. But that is not the only thing we were doing. It is much broader effort on the part of the organization to address service culture and to eliminate the harmful behaviors of assault, harassment, bullying, hazing, retaliation, retribution. I do need resources, and I owe the committee more insight into investments in, for example, our human capital IT system has not been updated in years, and we need to have a system that allows us to track and increase transparency around misconduct and crimes when they occur. There are additional people resources we need to add into our personnel system, and we've made some of those investments now, but as we continue to understand the work ahead. Another example is an integrated prevention program office. I have an office of one on the DoD side. These are much larger programs, and they're all areas for additional investment, and look forward to working with the committee to ensure that we're resourced on parity with other military services and that we're providing the support that our workforce so much deserves.
Building on that, how are you working to address the issue of trust among the workforce? You've already touched on some of it, but.
Yeah, so it is clear that trust and trust in leadership is a central theme. That trust was lost over a lengthy period of time, and it is going to take time to rebuild that trust, and I'm 100% committed to that. And as I said, we've embarked on a number of initiatives and efforts that include training, leadership awareness, understanding our own administrative misconduct system, investing in resources. And this is not a checklist approach. It's not a one and done. This is the journey we are on now as an organization, and trust is at the core of all that we do, and it's most elemental for us as leaders.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm out of time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Dr. Pavin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to thank Admiral Fagan and Master Chief Jones for being here today. Seems like it's been a very busy time for the U.S. Coast Guard here lately. The Dolly hitting the Key Bridge in Maryland, the recent barge crash and oil spill in Galveston, responding to devastating storms and flooding in southeast Texas, and some impressive seizures of illegally harvested fish in the Gulf of Mexico by illegal Mexican immigrants. We know you've got a lot on your plate. We appreciate you coming in to discuss your FY 2025 budget request with us. One of the comments I consistently hear when talking with members of the Coast Guard is what a serious issue that housing is. In fact, you've already addressed it this morning a little bit. I know this is an issue you're familiar with, but particularly for junior enlisted members of the Coast Guard, housing is a tremendous challenge. I noticed that the FY 2025 budget request did not include an increase in the housing fund. And I know you have a limited budget to work with, but I was curious why you decided not to include an increase in housing for your request. So the Coast Guard is doing a lot of great work. Excuse me, if you can address that.
Thank you for the question around housing. And so
Yes.
the best approach to housing for our workforce is a diversified approach. So ensuring that we've got parity with DOD and our pay scales that include a housing allowance for our work members, and engaging in that system to ensure that that housing allowance is reflective of actual cost in living areas. Other areas, we have lease authority and exercise leases so that junior members have some certainty and ability to access housing. And then in remote locations where there is insufficient housing, the option to build, operate, Coast Guard built housing is also an option. And we exercise all three of those to ensure that our members have access to housing. Housing is a challenge nationwide. There's been a disruption in the housing market, and so just finding available housing is priority one. Two is ensuring that the workforce then has the pay and the ability to exercise those leases, and we're working across all of those portfolios.
Good to hear. The Coast Guard is doing a lot of great work to support the Southeast Texas community in response to the ongoing rainfall and flooding that we've seen over the past really 6 weeks. Air Station Houston, which I represent, is currently operating 3 Dolphin helicopters. They're doing a great job. We're extremely proud of them, but I think there's a general consensus that an upgrade is needed. I'm curious if and when the air station will be getting upgraded to the new MH-60 helicopters. Is this something that's in the FY25 budget, or is something in the near-term plan? And if you don't have that information on hand, I'd appreciate it if you would send that to my team.
Thank you. We'll have the team provide the more detailed approach with regard to how we're transitioning from the aging fleet of 65s to the new fleet of 60s. An air station, Houston is one of those air stations that will get 60 helicopters, but it's space constrained, the hangar. We've got more work to do there to enable fielding of the 60s at Air Station Houston. We're committed to moving towards the 60 fleet and replacing the 65s. We've also got work to do, though, in the later phases of that to understand what the right rotary wing asset is going to be for some of those specialized missions. But right now, we remain focused on those primary search and rescue stations. As I said, Houston is on schedule for that, and I'll have the team walk you through the details of how we do those transitions.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, the recruitment challenges facing the Coast Guard are very serious. So Master Chief Jones, can you talk about how you're working to address these challenges, and what's the Coast Guard doing to improve recruitment? What are some of the challenges that you're seeing to get the recruitment up?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for that question. Recruiting is actually a reason for us to be optimistic right now. Thanks in large part to the support of this committee over the last couple of years for investment into our recruiting capacity, opening new recruiting offices, creating a recruiter rating so that we have folks that is their expertise, and that's where they focus. I just actually spoke to the CEO of Recruiting Command this morning, and we, as of this week, have passed 3,600 recruits into Training Center Cape May. Our goal every year is 4,200. The last time we reached that was 2017. The 3,600 we passed this week is the most we've had since 2017, and we remain pretty optimistic that we may be able to meet that goal. What that does is it allows us to where we have maybe bottomed out on the gap, but we still have many years in front of us to close that gap, building back forward with this. So we just look forward to continued support to open more recruiting offices in the areas where we need them, and I truly believe that we're going to see this sustained trend upwards.
Thank you very much. My time's expired, so I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ranking Member Larson, you recognize for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Comment out, Fagan, the budget request has $4.9 million for the Mariner credentialing. I believe in the recently passed Coast Guard authorization, we authorized 11 million, so it's a little less than half, much less than half of the 11 million. Do you expect that you'll come back in the next year to look for the remainder, or how do you approach that?
Yeah, you're referring to the Navitas system that we do have a budget authority field. It will field it to an initial operating capacity, and we will need to come back for additional funding authority to field the full system. It's a critical step forward in bringing our Mariner licensing and credentialing into the modern era, and look forward to continuing to work with the committee to do that.
Thanks. So when the other uniformed services have funding shortfalls, they're actually pretty brazen to go to the Pentagon and ask for money. In this case, you have the Francis Scott Key Bridge that has put further burdens on the Coast Guard's operations, and in order to deal with that situation. I asked Admiral Gautier a couple weeks ago when he testified here about backfilling the Coast Guard budget because of the resources devoted to the Key Bridge situation. Are you any closer to deciding how much and when you'll be requesting from the administration any backfill dollars?
So the direct cost to the Coast Guard at this point of the Francis Scott Key Bridge response is approximately $20 million in fuel and maintenance and spare parts. The broader reality is that as we focus that readiness and operational capacity on that particular response, it diminishes our ability to create operational capacity for other responses. It also highlights the fragility of the marine transportation system and infrastructure, and there are opportunity for greater investments there for the nation to secure our waterways, and we're working to identify where those areas of investment are beyond just the immediate direct cost that the Coast Guard has expended.
Yeah, and I imagine we're going to have a hearing probably in the future on what you find out about what we need to do to better harden the MTS. But do you have a plan to go to the administration and ask for that $20 million or so dollars to help with the backfill?
We will continue to work through the process as there's opportunity for supplemental or to articulate the cost with regard, and we will engage in the process. Yes, sir.
Thanks. So on the PC&I budget, you have $1.56 billion, and you said, I think in your testimony, you really need $3 billion. Is that what I got? Is that what I understood?
Yeah, closer to $3 to $4 billion is the actual PC&I need a year.
And did you ask for that, and it got pared down by DHS, or what is that? To the extent that you can enlighten us in the process there at DHS.
So as we work to submit a top-line budget to the department, hard offset decisions need to be made within the service. And so as a capital-intensive frontline operating organization, we prioritize people and operating assets as we work to create that top-line budget. And you can see in the chart that was shown earlier, right, we're at our lowest level of PC&I funding in 10 years. The maintenance accounts are about half of what they need to be. We've normalized parts exchanges as we take good parts off of cutters when they come in and put them onto others. Those numbers reflect the reality of operating a frontline operating agency and recapitalizing, critically recapitalizing the organization with regard to the major cutter programs.
Is it your role then in that process to explain to DHS that you have people, but they need to operate on platforms, but they're not funding the platforms for people to operate on, and you're hitting that point where the lines in the graph cross, which is a bad place to be?
No, we haven't. We continue to articulate that need. We signal the highest priority need through the unfunded priority list, which I know the committee has seen. Those are some of the first priorities, and continue to engage the process to adequately identify those areas of investments that the service needs.
I'll just conclude, Mr. Chair, by just noting we're still monitoring the base Seattle expansion and that role, so we'll follow up with you on that from the Pacific Northwest end of things. Thanks a lot. You go back.
Ranking Member yields back. Mr. Hizell, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Admiral Fagan and Master Chief Jones, for being here. It's always good to see you both and coming before the committee. The Coast Guard plays such a vital role in securing our nation's maritime border and securing America's ports. As a member of this committee, I want to ensure the men and women of this branch have the resources they need to carry out their mission effectively. Currently, the Coast Guard is facing an unprecedented manpower shortage. Autonomous and uncrewed vessels could potentially alleviate the strain that's putting on the force. Great strides are being made in my district in South Mississippi at the Roger Wicker Center for Ocean Enterprise, which includes numerous research and development partnership programs focused on uncrewed maritime systems and the broader blue economy. Admiral Fagan, do you think that the autonomous maritime vehicles could help alleviate your workforce shortage?
Thank you. Obviously, unmanned systems and unmanned technology, it's here, it's game-changing, and it is critical to ensure that we have that appropriately reflected in our portfolio of operating capacity. We released an unmanned systems strategy in 2023. We're working a joint program office with CBPs. We operate MQ-9s, examples of ways that the service is bringing unmanned technology into our portfolio. Scan Eagle is critical enabler on our national security cutters. We've contracted with Sail Drone, which are unmanned on the water systems, and we continue to look for how we can bring unmanned technology into our portfolio. But unmanned is not manned. It still requires people to operate those systems, but continue to look at that technology as key enablers for our workforce.
Very good. When looking at acquisitions, what are some of the needs at the Coast Guard in the autonomous merit? What are some of the needs that you have in this vessel space?
Specific to autonomy or just broader?
Yeah.
We continue to look at those technologies. Scan Eagle is a great example that we've fielded, that ship-based, ship-recovered, contractor-owned, contractor-operated unmanned system into the NSC fleet. It has been game-changing for us in the operational work that we do. We'll continue to look for other opportunities to field unmanned systems into new assets. We've talked about the Polar Security Cutter. That too will be a platform that's ripe for unmanned technology in certain portfolios.
Very good. The Coast Guard currently collaborates with CBP on the use of long-range autonomous aircraft systems as well. These types of assets provide the service with the ability to monitor large areas in a cost-effective way. Does Coast Guard plan to explore the acquisition of its own long-range unmanned aircraft systems?
We are operating jointly with CBP out with the MQ-9s. As I said, they have provided great benefit. As we look at the aviation portfolio that we are operating as a service, we've talked about the 65 to 60 transitions. We've got medium-range and long-range fixed-wing aircraft portfolio that we're also looking at from an analysis standpoint. And there's what you can logically look at that analysis and study and conclude that there is a room for unmanned systems. What that is, how it's operated, and what kind of budget support and people support we'll need to do that is part of an ongoing analysis of where we are with overall aviation portfolio.
Thank you. We're seeing a lot of things going on in the country right now, around the world especially. Could you tell us a little bit, about some of your concerns the Coast Guard role is playing around the world to like some of our adversaries such as Iran and China and Russia?
We are a globally deployed Coast Guard. The demand for the kind of capabilities, professionalism, law enforcement, rule of law that the United States Coast Guard brings to maritime problem sets, that demand is loud and growing. The work we're doing in the Indo-Pacific, we specifically engage partner nations and allies, help them build their own sovereignty, their own capacity. Look no further than the Harriet Lane, who was in Vanuatu in the Pacific recently, helping Vanuatu enforced their own sovereignty in their own exclusive economic zone by allowing Vanuatu to board Chinese fishing vessels in Vanuatu's exclusive economic zone. Whether it's ships or people, we have a just great, the great respect of many Coast Guards and Navies around the world, and look forward to continue to be able to enable other nations to create their own capacity and sovereignty.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I have just 1 minute, I have a question submitted by Chairman Graves, if I could ask on his behalf.
You're recognized.
My next question is on behalf of T&I Full Committee Chairman Sam Graves. With bridge safety at the forefront on everyone's mind right now, including the Midwest, just north of Chairman Graves' district, where a barge struck the Fort Madison Bridge and shut down operations for a few hours, do you think an evaluation of the Truman-Hobbs list of bridges makes sense? And should Congress look for resources to fund those critical infrastructure assets?
It's clear as you look at the infrastructure in the country, and obviously the Dolly and the recent barge bridge collision reflect the changes in the marine transportation system that have occurred in time. And we're looking at how we might look holistically at several of the key ports in the country to ensure that there's an understanding of what the infrastructure is, what's changed, and what might be needed to mitigate it. And bridges will be a part of that. And happy to come back to Chairman Graves and share with the committee thinking in a way ahead to ensure that our nation's maritime transportation system is secure and resilient.
Thank you for that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Pappas, you're recognized. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Fagan, Master Chief Jones, thanks for being with us, for your service to our nation, and for your leadership, which is so critical for a number of the emerging challenges that we face as a nation. I appreciate your insights today. And Admiral Fagan, I want to ask you about an issue of local and regional concern in my district. Coast Guard Station Portsmouth Harbor is among the Coast Guard's busiest facilities within the northern New England sector. In January 2024, the facility experienced significant damage and was forced to temporarily close as a result of a winter storm. The floating pier at the station was severely damaged. The storm caused a sinkhole adjacent to the seawall at the facility. And while the Coast Guard has initiated interim repairs to restore operations at the facility, it is also leasing a space at a nearby marina. We know the shore infrastructure remains in a degraded state. So I know that the Shore Infrastructure Program Governance Council recently met to prioritize infrastructure needs across the Coast Guard. This station's covered moorings was one of the top requested funding priorities in the first Coast Guard district. But the district hasn't yet received the results from the Governance Council, and there's concern about how long this work is going to take. The work includes additional funding through future budget requests to perform survey and design work, but the station can't wait years for this survey and design work to happen before it even considers the needed repairs and upgrades that must be made. So I'm wondering if you're focused on this particular issue, if you can commit to prioritizing the rebuilding of this facility, and if you could just comment at large on the status of our infrastructure across the country and what investments we need to be making.
Yep, thank you. And I'm familiar with the flooding that occurred last fall that damaged the station, and we've reflected money and priority in the unfunded priority list specific to that station. This comes back to the overall shortfall in the PC&I account writ large, right? The lowest level of funding in 10 years. And so as you look at stations around the country, there is critical need, not just in the station you've referenced, but in others, at air stations and across the country. Getting to $3 to $4 billion of predictable, regular funding into the PC&I account helps create the kind of predictability and certainty to begin the design work, planning work early, and then allow us to execute that money in a way that's responsible to the American public. But this is a shortfall and a challenge that's been with the service for a number of years, and you see it directly in your district. And we're committed to continue to, one, articulate the need, and then work to ensure that we've got the process maturity to execute on that money.
Well, thank you. I know you agree that our Coast Guard deserve to operate in the most modern, resilient facilities possible, and that we need to be able to deal with challenges that come up, including from weather events like we saw affect Station Portsmouth Harbor. So I appreciate your attention to that, and any additional details you have about Portsmouth, we'd be willing to talk with you more about that offline. I also appreciate the conversation earlier about the accountability and transparency review. I know you said that continues to produce results, and I hope you'll continue to keep this subcommittee updated on what the findings are there. Master Chief Jones, thanks very much for your conversation around recruitment. I think this is such a core issue, and you discussed some of the systemic problems in terms of just quality of life issues that we need to address for the service, and I appreciate the engagement that you've had with Coasties and their families. In response to the recruiting challenges, the Coast Guard Authorization Act includes about $12 million in FY25 to fund additional recruiting personnel and offices for the Coast Guard Recruiting Command, and $9 million to enhance Coast Guard recruiting capabilities. I think these are smart investments. Is this of the magnitude that's needed to continue the progress that you say we're making? Will you continue to be optimistic if this is the level that we're able to fund this year and in future years?
Yeah, any investment into our recruiting capacity is appreciated. With some of the technology that we need to allow us to recruit with some of the modern tools, that's where the investment, we're really optimistic where the funding is going to help us get to where if a recruiter meets someone at an event, right now we've got an older paper-based system that takes us just a long time to go back and forth. This investment is going to allow us we could leave that event with that member knowing, okay, if I want, I can go to Training Center Cape May on this date, and we can we can shrink the timeline between contact with the recruit and getting the recruits through Cape May. So any investment in that we do appreciate as we continue to move forward.
Well, I know it takes time to build systems and momentum and to change culture even and to help spread the word. So we appreciate what you're doing there. Please keep us updated on what we can do in Congress to help capitalize on the recent success. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Colton, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to our witnesses. Appreciate you joining us today. This is such an important conversation. As you both know, I am especially pleased to discuss the issues facing Coast Guard City, USA, Grand Haven. Invite you to our Coast Guard Festival, the Centennial this summer, and it's a lovely time. The Great Lakes are essential to American commerce, which is why I'm laser focused on the U.S. Coast Guard Great Lakes Icebreaker Program. As you know, the Coast Guard included $25 million in its FY25 unfunded priorities list to acquire new heavy icebreakers for the Great Lakes. I have to endure a lot of jokes in Michigan because we had a low ice season about whether or not we still need those, but believe me, I know how much we do. Planning out and trying to predict what comes in future years is so essential, and we are unprepared right now when it comes to the current state of our Great Lakes icebreakers. This question is for Admiral Fagan. In 2024, the $35 million that was requested was not funded. How does this year's appropriation sort of come on the heels of that unfunded priority from 2024, and how can we ensure that this gets funded and we make up additionally what was lost from 2024?
Yeah, and I have testified previously, we are committed to an additional Great Lakes icebreaker. It's critical that we have year-round access to navigation in the Great Lakes. This most previous winter's lack of ice notwithstanding, it's vital to the economic security of the nation. And so funding received in '24 will help us with the analyze select phase of acquisition for that icebreaker. From the time you start analyze and select, it will still be a number of years to actually build and field that icebreaker. And so I understand the urgency and the sense of concern over the need to field the Great Lakes icebreaker. A lot of discussion around Mackinac, which is the current icebreaker operating up there. It's a 20-year-old design, and there's some limits in hull form, but we are remain committed to the Great Lakes icebreaker as a priority. And in our 25 UPL request $25 million for program management and to begin bringing that program forward. But understand the urgency, and we're committed to working with the committee to ensure that the Great Lakes icebreaker becomes a reality in the future.
That's great. Well, let us know what we can continue to do to help and push for that. It's so critical. My second question, ensuring sufficient personnel is vital for the Coast Guard to carry out its work and maintain defense readiness. In its report last year, GAO confirmed that the service's workforce shortages are cyclical, and data points MCPO Jones, we're excited to hear about your recruitment numbers coming in, but we have a huge gap to make up from missing that mark since 2017. With 49,000 active duty and reserve personnel, the Coast Guard's workforce is smaller than the City of New York's police department. Admiral Fagan, considering the importance of the operations and support account to address the Coast Guard's attrition challenges, how will the requested funds bolster additional recruitment to keep up the good success that we're seeing right now?
So we are seeing success in recruiting, and I am thankful for support we've had from the committee and in previous years, which has allowed us to reinvest in recruiting capacity. We've brought recruiters online. We've opened new recruiting offices. We've stood up junior ROTC programs, and we're on track to have a program in all of our districts here soon. And we continue to make the needed investments to, one, ensure that we're quicker from the time of contact to get people into Cape May, and that the other thing we struggle with is not everybody knows who the United States Coast Guard is, and so illuminating to the workforce and the talent out there who we are and what we are as an organization. We do have investments that we need to make, and we've signaled through some of the UPL around our training center in Cape May. So one, finding the talent, but then two, you need to give them the appropriate training experience, and when we bring them through our single enlisted training source in Cape May. But we continue to invest in workforce, and as I said, I'm excited about where the numbers are, but we need to continue to gain ground.
No greater asset than our coasties. So thank you so much. I yield back.
Generally yields back. Mr. Auchincloss, you recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Admiral and Master Chief, appreciate your testimony today. I had the great pleasure of spending time earlier this week at the invitation of Rear Admiral Platt in Boston with the 1st District Command and Staff and enlisted, and was so impressed, though not surprised, by the professionalism and poise of the young officers and enlisted who are ensuring readiness for search and rescue, who are enforcing our fisheries laws and conservation mandate, and who are just generally representing, I think, the very best of this country. And I know both of you would be proud, and we need to recruit and support more of this type of personnel in the Coast Guard. And although I voted against the Coast Guard authorization out of objections to a misguided offshore wind provision in there, I am fully committed to resourcing and supporting the Coast Guard as you perform your 11 essential missions. Admiral, in your testimony, you discussed the importance of the Coast Guard's presence in the Indo-Pacific region and the increased demand from our allies and partners for sustained Coast Guard presence. I think it's a vitally important way that we project not just hard, but also soft power. People want to work with the Coast Guard. The FY25 budget requests $263 million to expand Coast Guard operations in the Indo-Pacific along 3 primary lines of effort: increased presence, maritime governance, and meaningful engagements. As these kinds of operations and partnerships expand, do you think the current structure of these operations is effective? Would it potentially be more effective, for example, to take lessons from the combined maritime forces model based in Bahrain that the Navy uses?
So we're very thankful for the support that we received in the '24 budget, which includes 2 additional fast response cutters beyond the original program of record, and those will be focused into the mission sets in the Indo-Pacific. So as we've looked at the opportunity that the Coast Guard can provide to countering some of the problem set in the Pacific, we've been articulating that these are investments above the needs that the organization has right now. We've talked about the PC&I and maintenance challenges that we're faced with. And so as As money and support is provided, we look at creating that opportunity, and whether it's ships like the 2 fast response cutters, ships like the Harriet Lane, which was funded as a Pacific support tender and rehome ported into Honolulu. We create incredible return on investment for the resources that do focus into the region.
I think Congress, in a bipartisan manner, is convinced of that. The question is, would a CMF, a Combined Maritime Forces style system, work for the Coast Guard as it has for the Navy in the Indo-Pacific?
So happy to work with the committee on analyzing. That system works well for us with regard to our assets that are supporting Fifth Fleet. What and how to posture forces across the Pacific, forces that include Coast Guard forces. Look forward to working with the committee on that question.
And what questions would you have as a part of that discussion?
So when you forward deploy ships, right, we need to be clear-eyed with regard to the full support need, piers, maintainers, logistics, infrastructure, family support, and ensuring that we've thought through the totality of that so that when you have an operating asset, you can actually put them into theater and operate them for effect to counter the threat.
Isn't that true now, though, with or without the Combined Maritime Forces model? Or why is that different under that?
So the Combined Maritime Forces model, right, those ships are permanently assigned in Bahrain. They work under the operational and tactical control of the Navy.
So it's the permanent
there
versus
are
rotation.
operating concepts and models, several, that need to be thought through with regard to, sort of the merits and pros and cons. Each brings cost and, infrastructure and logistics support. We just have not done the analysis, but welcome the opportunity to have that conversation with the committee.
Is there a nation along the rim of the South China Sea that if you think you were going to apply that model to the South China Sea would work to be a permanent station?
So what and how U.S. forces, that include Coast Guard forces, are postured in the region is a conversation broader than the Coast Guard, but we would welcome the opportunity to be included in that. Guam is a perfect example. I have Coast Guard forces in Guam now.
Right.
There are a number of initiatives that the Navy and the Marines have going on in Guam. We need to be part of that conversation so that it doesn't become just a DOD lens into the region with regard to our national security needs.
Got it. So it's fair to say that the Coast Guard is ready, willing, and able to have a conversation about a CMF for the Indo-Pacific region.
Yeah, we welcome the opportunity to be part of that joint force and part of that conversation.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Let's see, Mr. Garamendi, you're recognized.
Admiral and Mr. Jones, good work in Baltimore. The rumors around here, all the chatter around here is that the Coast Guard, working with the Army Corps of Engineers, has done an extraordinary piece of work with the bridge collapse in Baltimore. So thank you. Another example, if you want something done, get the Coast Guard. Mr. Auchincloss, you were pursuing a very, very important piece of questioning. In the 2021-22 Don Young Coast Guard Authorization Act, it directs the Coast Guard to calculate the cost of doing missions with or on behalf of other service branches like the Navy. Mr. Auchincloss, you had a detailed discussion with Admiral Fagan about the Middle East as well as the South Pacific. The Navy cannot do its work without the Coast Guard. Yet the Coast Guard, with a budget 1/1000th of the U.S. Navy, is expected to stand and to carry on tasks that the Navy cannot do. There's something seriously wrong here about this situation. And the Department of Defense jealously guards every $1 billion of the 900 or so that they have and refuses to share any of that with the missions that the Coast Guard carries on in support of the Navy and the United States missions in those areas. Is that correct, Admiral?
We are 1.4% of the DoD budget. And as I articulated, that not just the demand from allies and partners for Coast Guard services, but as I meet with every one of the combatant commands, demand for the Coast Guard. And the budget structure, this is broader than my organizational change, the budget structure creates that challenge with regard to funding for work that the Coast Guard, national security work, defense work that the Coast Guard does on behalf of the nation.
My point here is that we need the information so that we can fight on your behalf. Please, it's been a year, almost 2 years now. Tell us what you're spending in these, also the Caribbean, the South Pacific, the Arctic, and also the Middle East, so that we can then carry on an argument with the Department of Defense about the financial support that is absolutely essential to the security of this nation and to your operations. And Mr. Auchincloss, you're on this. Thank you for raising this issue. I came in on the discussion of the polar cutter, and I promised myself I wouldn't raise it. It's been 11 years since this committee raised the issue, started the project. It's really essential that you come to us with why it hasn't been done, what are the problems, what is your solution? There is no way that the United States role in the Arctic can be achieved without these icebreakers. And I'm not saying just one, it has to be more than one. It's a hell of a lot more important than the money that we're spending with a whole bunch of billions last night in the Armed Services NDAA markup. You've got to get us detailed information about why it isn't going forward and what you need to make it happen. So please, it's a national security issue of profound importance, and we are way, way late here. Okay, so please do that. Deliver it to the committee if you would be. Offshore wind, the legislation in 2021, the President signed an amendment that I put forward in the Coast Guard bill that closed a loophole in the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act by applying all federal labor, environmental, immigration, customs, antitrust, and Jones Act to the Outer Continental Shelf's wind industry. Customs and Border Patrol's made some progress in writing rules and regulations to carry out that law. You haven't. Why?
I'm aware where the law, where the challenges around offshore wind. We're committed to continuing to work to implement the intent with regard to the committee and Congress's desires in that regard.
Why haven't you done it?
We are engaged in the process around the notice of proposed rulemaking, and we'll continue to work with the committee specific to the legislation as it pertains to Jones Act application, and I'm happy to have the team provide the current status of those efforts.
Little things mean a lot. This is a major issue about how we're going to participate, the American industry, American workers, American Maritime are going to participate in the offshore wind industry. Your regulations are critically important in carrying out the law, as are the U.S. Customs and Border Protection regulations. For the committee, some of this committee is on the Armed Services Committee also, some of the members. Maybe it's a hangover from the extraordinary money that was spent last night as we finished up the NDAA. I am definitely out of time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Van Drew, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you, Chairman. Although Training Center Cape May is such a, in fact, let me start at the beginning. Training Center Cape May is the 5th largest base in the Coast Guard and the sole accession point for the entire enlisted workforce. In turn, the Coast Guard is a fundamental part, as you know, of the culture and the economy of southern New Jersey. Although Training Center Cape May is such a vital piece of shoreside infrastructure to the Coast Guard, many facilities are in urgent need of repair, and I know, again, you're very aware of this, especially the barracks. While I'm glad to see that $225 million is authorized in FY25 for the improvements of facilities at the training center, I am aware that Phase 1 construction is currently running over budget. I personally testified in front of the Appropriations Subcommittee on the Homeland Security and submitted a request for this project, so I want to ensure that enough funds are provided to complete this project entirely. It's an important project. Commandant Fagan, thank you for being here again. It's good to see you again. And thank you for taking the time to be here today. Could you provide an update on the progress of Phase 1 of the barracks and how much more money are we going to need over the requested budget for this project?
Thank you for the question. I do not have a specific figure with me, but we'll commit to you to come back and do that. I remain committed to the investments at Cape May. You've highlighted it's critical that our enlisted workforce has access to safe and modern buildings and training facilities. I know you're aware of the broader investment plan and strategy that we have for Cape May, and welcome the opportunity to come over and share exact status of Phase 1 and then plans for the additional phases as we look to gain funding support for those critical investments in Cape May.
I would appreciate that, Commandant, and if you could share that, obviously with me, but also with the entire committee. It's not only important to New Jersey or Cape May, as you know, it's important to the entire country. And with the changes, some of them good, that are occurring in the Coast Guard, with many more women coming into the Coast Guard, we want to ensure that those barracks are updated. It's essential. My team was recently up in South Jersey at a public meeting on navigation, and was navigation safety, where they met with members of the Coast Guard. And they took the opportunity to express the concerns of dozens of my constituents that were there. It represents many thousands of my constituents, tens of thousands, including fishermen, tug barge and shipping vessel operators, and recreational boat users about the navigational security issues that exist relating to the offshore wind projects. Now, I'm going to change a change of tact for me. I'm not going to attack the offshore wind projects today, even though I am thoroughly, completely, totally opposed to them for many, many different reasons. But today, I want to really reference their conversations and that the Coast Guard acknowledge that there's a risk of vessel radar interference from wind turbine towers. Personally, I hope we're never going to have to worry about it. However, do you also recognize the concerns with the radar interference?
Yeah, thank you. We're obviously working closely with regard to the challenges presented by the wind farms. We've completed a number of studies. We participated in that public meeting you referenced. We've got a notice of proposed rulemaking out with a comment period that'll close in 17 May, committed to the environmental study and process, and we are fully engaged with that process and with BOEM as well. With regard to the radar issue, we participated in a National Academy of Science working group, but we have provided guidance in the form of a navigation vessel inspection. It's an advisory notice to proactively address potential risks. It includes requirements for warning signals, devices, charting uniform spaces, safety equipment. We are committed to the safety of navigation and addressing those challenges and issues specific to wind farms, and have engaged on the challenge specific.
There are a lot of real concerns out there, Commandant, and I appreciate that. And, you know, both issues I brought up were done so to ensure that our Coast Guard, and I'm sure you are, is well provided for and can operate in the safest way possible. And I urge consideration of the safety risks that are prevalent to the entire maritime community posed by offshore wind. I'm happy to work with you, I'm happy to work with your team, and I'm happy to work to ensure that the barracks and other shoreside infrastructure projects at the training center Cape May are completed because it's for the good of America, not just for the good of New Jersey. And most of all, I'm willing to work with you on these wind turbine issues. I think they're very serious and of tremendous concern. I think these projects are not well thought out, in my opinion, but I do appreciate you and the work that you do, and I always love the Coast Guard, and it's good to see you here today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Peltola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commandant, thank you. Before I begin my line of questioning, I just wanted to bring up some concerns that I've heard this week regarding a work order that was issued 11 months ago by the Office of Vessel Compliance called Issued Work Instruction 032. And what that work instruction potentially, there are potential negative impacts to the fishing vessels that make up the Alyeska Pipeline Ship Escort Response Vehicle System in Prince William Sound. After the Exxon Valdez hit Bligh Reef, the fishing vessels within Prince William Sound rallied and really helped us with that major oil spill, and that continues to be our fleet that is the oil response fleet. This fishing fleet is the backbone of Alyeska's pipeline oil response program, and the vessels are used to transport response equipment, deploy and tend boom, mobilize pre-stage equipment to protect hatcheries, and to recover oil into micro and mini barges that have a capacity to carry less than 250 barrels of oil. The Alyeska Serves Oil Spill Response System for Prince William Sound has been held up as a world-renowned model, largely because of the contracted and trained fishing vessel response fleet. And that work order has created a lot of ambiguities for them and the Prince William Sound region. And I know that this probably isn't something that you are directly involved with, but I really wanted to put it on your radar and see if I can get your help in addressing some of those ambiguities in that work order.
Yeah, no, thank you for raising the issue, and I know my staff is absolutely engaged on that issue as we seek to find the right balance to ensure that oil spill planning and response capabilities in Alaska, and I know it's different in Alaska, but look, I'm committed to working with you and the stakeholders to ensure that we ensure that we strike that right balance.
Okay, and I have some other questions about asking you to help me and my office keep on track of the timelines for the fast response cutter headed to Seward, the fast response cutter headed to Sitka, and the icebreaker headed to Juneau. And I also have a question, had a question prepared for me for Master Chief Jones regarding the child care facilities, and I know that that is an ongoing work effort. But I'm going to forgo these questions. I just came from a seafood roundtable that we had with our two senators and Secretary Raimondo from Department of Commerce. And what we have in Alaska right now is a fishing industry in free fall. And so much of it is because of the war with Russia and Russia's need to fund their war against Ukraine. And much of that funding is coming literally from stolen fish from Alaska. There are salmon that are being trawled in waters that border with Russia, and many of our seafood resources go back and forth. And Russia has upped their quota, and they also, not only are they unsustainably harvesting just astronomical amounts and really glutting the market, but they also are using Chinese slave labor, and much of the product is being processed through China using slave Uyghur labor. So that really puts Alaskan fishermen and United States fishermen at a severe disadvantage when the harvests are exorbitant and then there is almost no overhead in processing these. And what the senators and I are trying to do is to elevate this to the national security issue that it is and the global issue that it is when we're talking about using United States resources to fund this war against Ukraine. And I'm wondering how we can better give the Coast Guard resources to help this. And I think it's noteworthy to mention that in Alaskan waters, we've had the Coast Guard alert us that Chinese and Russian warships are in formation in Alaskan waters. And the deterrent right now is the presence of the Coast Guard. We really don't have a Navy presence. The Navy doesn't like ice, so it falls to you all to protect America in Alaska's waters. And that doesn't even speak to the search and rescue efforts that you do every day. And I understand that there was a submerged vessel near Sitka that you all have been responding to, and I really appreciate that response, although it looks like it's all bad news from that incident. But so often it is good news because you're out there rescuing Alaskans and United States citizens almost daily. But this issue of national security and our economies being very impacted by Russia, I'm wondering, how can we help make sure you have the resources to tackle this?
So I'll commit to having my staff engage with yours. There's the number of elements in the issues that you rose, starting with illegal fishing, our role in illegal unregulated fishing, presence in the Arctic, the criticality of the Polar Security Cutter, the assets that we do have in Alaska, and we will have FRCs in Sitka and Seward. I'm happy to affirm that, but we'll come over and, because it'll probably merit just broader conversation than what we can do here, but look forward to that conversation with you and your team.
Recognized yet? Well, I have one. I've been recognized, but I got to ask this. So I guess for the purposes, Admiral Fagan, for the purpose of our members in Florida, can you assure me that the Coast Guard is prepared to confront the potential mass migration of Haitian migrants?
We're obviously engaged. We have Coast Guard assets employed in the Caribbean, in the Florida Straits, in the Mona Pass, every day to ensure that, one, attempts at illegal maritime migrations don't result in the loss of life. It is critical life-saving work. But we have assets postured to prevent and mitigate those kinds of attempts. We've been in that posture for quite some time. We've contracted with Saildrone to increase some capacity and awareness, and we continue to remain very focused on preventing illegal attempts. And when it does occur, again, ensuring that people don't lose their lives. It has that the flows ebb and flow seasonally. We're postured the way we need to be right now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. So, we're done. No one else to recognize, and subcommittee stands adjourned.